So now it's time to learn about how to query for conferences. But for our queries to be useful, we actually need to have some conferences to query over. So go ahead and create a couple conferences, maybe more if you like. You can use the Create Conference page in your app to do that, or you can use the APIs Explorer, whichever you like. The Create Conference page is a little nicer because it limits the choices of the topics to valid topics, and it uses this nice date picker for selecting the start date and the end date. So the only property that's really required is the name. All the other properties will default to the default values. But for our queries to be useful, you're going to need to set a couple of these properties. So go ahead and create a conference. So you have to be sure to specify the conference name. You can choose a city. You are going to need some conferences in London. I'm going to skip the description. And you are going to need some conferences in London that are not about medical innovation. So let's make this one, this would be health and nutrition, right? Because it's about chocolate. We'll pick a start date in June, end date, probably should be after the start date, and then we'll create the conference. So go ahead and create some conferences. You're going to need a conference where the city is London and the topic doesn't include medical innovations. Create another one where the city is London, the topic includes medical innovations, and the start date is in June, and the max attendees is greater than 10. And you feel free to create some other ones as well. If you didn't get all that, don't worry. When you need these particular conferences, I will remind you to create them if you didn't already. And again, we already talked about this, but you're going to need to use the data store viewer in the admin console to review your entities to make sure your conferences actually got created and saved. Now that we've got some conferences, it's time to write the query conferences function. You've already learned that using Objectify, to get an entity by key, you use the load method. So here's the code to load the entity if we know its key. Call the load method on Offie, call the key method passing the key, and then now so it happens right away. This works if you know the key of the entity that you want to get, but for conferences we don't know what the key is because we let App Engine create the key for us with an auto-allocated ID. So we actually don't know what the keys are for the conferences. But actually it turns out that doesn't matter. We're just going to query for them. So here's how you create a query to get all entities of a given kind. Offie.load, as we did before, but this time we specify type, and then in our case, since what we want to do is get all entities of a given kind, we need to pass kind.class to type. So here's the query to get all entities of the kind recipe. So you see we just specify recipe.class here. You can also sort the results based on a property value. So here's how you'd sort the recipe entities according to their name. You just call the order method and you specify the property to sort on, and we're going to sort on the name. So to actually go ahead and execute the query, you call the list method. So here's what you'll do to add the functionality to query for all conferences. In the Conference API class, you're going to add a method called query conferences. There we are, query conferences. You're going to have to write this one for yourself. See here I define the @API method to expose the function as an endpoint and to specify the name, the path, and the HTTP method. In this case, this needs to be post. And for now, it takes no arguments. See that? No arguments. You're going to fix that later on, but for now, it takes no arguments. You're going to add the code to query for all conferences sorted by name, and then you're going to return the query list. So see here we have the error for query, so you're going to need to fix that, and you actually need to import the Objectify query, and that's in com Google code objectify.cmd.query. So make sure that you import the query that goes with Objectify, not the one for the native data store. So after you've written your query conferences method, you can try it out in the APIs Explorer. You go to the APIs Explorer on localhost and you see the services. You're probably going to need to refresh the page here, otherwise you won't see the query conferences method. But here we have query conferences. You click on it. Now if you recall, we didn't provide any input arguments, so there's no request body to fill in, so just press execute and let's see if we've got any conferences. Yes, I only have one conference called App Engine for All, and here we see it in the response. You can also use the Show Conferences page in the UI because this page also sends a call to query conferences. So this is an example of what you might see in the Show Conferences page. Got a list of all the conferences that have been created. There's no point adding filters because the current implementation of Query Conferences doesn't know anything about filters.